Hey guys, my name is Matsimio, and today I want to do something a little bit different and take a look back at what Rainbow Six Siege looked like during the alpha and the beta. I know this might seem a little bit weird since it's been like 3 years, literally 3 years almost, since the alpha was released, but I was blown away by how much this game has progressed since then. The little small details and the stuff that we take for granted weren't even present back then. The game really was significantly different, and I just kind of thought this would be a fun little walk down memory lane, or for some of you, just to see where Rainbow Six Siege started from. And so the first thing that I don't remember whatsoever about the alpha is that shield operators had the ability to aim down sights without having to lower their shield. They could have the full protection of their shield in front of them, but also the same aim down accuracy that we're all accustomed to without leaving themselves vulnerable. Ubisoft has stated before that early on in development that they were having a hard time balancing out the shield operators. They of course didn't want them to be overpowered, but they didn't want them to be underpowered as well, and they're having a hard time finding that sweet spot. They also stated in their AMA a while ago that they didn't think that headshots were going to be as prominent as they were. They thought, of course, that things were going to revolve more around getting body shots and that every once in a while you would get a headshot. And so with that in mind, I can kind of see where Ubisoft was coming from early on in development. All the other operators have access to these amazing weapons. The shield operators, of course, don't. And so why not allow them to have the full protection of the shield while also aiming down sights? As we all know, though, that's not the way that the game works now. Can you imagine if shields were able to have this capability today? They would have a 100% pick rate. Yes, for the first couple of weeks or months when the game first came out, people may not have gravitated towards them, but once people realized that the name of the game was getting headshots, shield operators would have been a must pick on offense. And so I just thought it was really cool to see that they were even experimenting with this from the very beginning. Another thing that you might have noticed is that there are hit markers. Not just when you take out a gadget or you take someone down, but literally every single time you hit an enemy. I feel like early on, once again, Ubisoft was having a difficult time figuring out what kind of game that they were creating. You look at most other first-person games, they have hit markers. Call of Duty, Battlefield, I mean even Fortnite today, I know that wasn't out back then, but they have hit markers. That's just kind of a standard of the genre. That just gives that good feedback to the player that they're actually hitting their enemy. Of course, that doesn't really work in a game like Rainbow Six Siege. Because of the crazy amount of destruction, a strategy that was even employed during the alpha was just shoot through all of the walls, try to figure out where the enemy was based off of the hit markers, and then just kind of rip in that general direction when you kind of got an idea of where they were located. That was a little bit game breaking. Of course, there were ways to minimize this. We had wall reinforcements, for example, but it was this weird limbo state where Ubisoft had all these really cool hardcore mechanics. They were trying to do something vastly different from the competition, but they still had hit markers. Thankfully, as we all know, they've been eliminated from the game almost entirely, but for that brief couple of months, Rainbow Six Siege was a very different game. Another thing I completely forgot about in the alpha is that hatches were a lot bigger from what we're used to. Basically twice the size. If you guys remember during the E3 trailer a very long time ago when they first announced and revealed Rainbow Six Siege, it looked like Ubisoft had the intention for us to be able to destroy basically every floor and go from one floor down below. It would have been really dynamic, but I think Ubisoft kind of ran into the problem where that made it very challenging to balance out these objectives from a competitive standpoint. Yes, as a player, it would have been amazing to have that capability to basically destroy every single floor that you came across, but I can also see why they reeled in that concept. I feel like this is where hatches come into play. Hatches still allow you to drop onto the objective, but you're not able to drop anywhere on the objective. It gives Ubisoft more influence on their map design. But apparently early on, they were experimenting with much larger hatches. If I had to take a guess, and the reason why they shrunk them to the size that they are today is that it still gave us too much verticality. Just like everything that we just talked about, if you're able to make these giant holes over the objective room with nothing blocking them like railings, for example, it gives offense too much of line of sight on that objective, and it would be too difficult for defense to defend that area. But of course, that is just a guess. And then finally, the last thing that I noticed in this alpha is that everything is very bare bones. This truly was an alpha. The two maps that we were able to play on was House and Plane. And while House looks very similar to what we have today, Plane is a different story. It had basically the same layout that we're all accustomed to today, but the textures were very basic, the lighting was very different, and because of those very simple things, when I was watching the gameplay, there were moments where I literally didn't recognize the room that I was in. Someone dropped down on a hatch, and I was like, wait, is that the basement? And yeah, it is the basement. It looks very different from what we have today. On top of that, a lot has been done to the icons in Rainbow Six Siege. I don't remember these icons whatsoever. I remember the ones in the beta. We'll talk about that here in a second when we move on over to the beta gameplay, but I don't remember these. Apparently, the recruit, the one that we're all accustomed to, was just the flag of the country that recruit was from. Ash is just a bunch of arrows. I don't even know what the one with the smoke and the flame, some of these, like, they make sense. Like, okay, that one's castle, maybe that one's rook, but all of the others, I have no idea. Like, they are very different from the ones that we have right now. Moving on over into the beta, we get to see that those icons were changed into something that isn't what we have today, but is very different. This kind of gives us a cool glimpse into the process and progress that goes into creating all this artwork and the UI itself. They're constantly iterating and changing and making these adjustments to see what sticks and to see what works. Clearly it wasn't working in the alpha, it didn't work in the beta, because while I know that some people look back on it and get nostalgic because some of these icons were really cool. Thermites, for example, looks awesome, but it doesn't really represent what Thermite is all about. Like, yes, some of these make sense, but a lot of them just looked out of place and there wasn't a theme to all of them, and so they went with something different. But it's just cool to see the process that went into making these icons and how quickly it changed just from the alpha to beta and then into release. Now, one thing I do remember about the beta, though, was that shield operators were once again blatantly overpowered. I think you needed to lower the shield to aim down sight to be able to take people out that way, but you didn't need to do that because of the hipfire accuracy. You thought Monty was good a couple of months ago when he was able to hipfire people down. He didn't even pale in comparison to what it was during the beta. At least that's what I remember. You were able to get sniped basically across the room. When you encountered a shield operator, you had to double team them. That was the only way to take them out, and you were basically just kind of trying to get lucky. I distinctly remember every single person that I played this game with, they loathed going against shield operators because they were that powerful. This just once again reinforces that idea that Ubisoft was struggling to make shield operators well balanced. They didn't know, should they have that full protection? Should they be able to hit fire people down? They don't have the best weapons. How in the world do they balance that out? And that was clearly evident during the beta. And then finally, probably the biggest thing I took away from this gameplay was how no one knew what they were doing when playing Rainbow Six Siege. I know this might seem a little bit odd, it's kind of hard to put into words, but when I watch this gameplay, clearly I have no idea what I'm doing, but there was something magical about learning this game with everyone else. No one's really holding angles. No one really knows the strategy and the meta, and it's just exciting to see how things have progressed and how I've progressed as a player. I mean, I'm watching this and I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you running into the room? Why don't you see that guy crawling around in the corner? Like, why are you making all of these mistakes? But then when I think about it, that's what I loved about the start of Rainbow Six Siege. And while that magic is still there, I still learn new things every single day. It's nowhere near like what it was at the very start. There's something about playing a game for the very first time with everyone else just experiencing along with you that I love. And that was something that we'll never really get anymore with this game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was just kind of cool to relive those early moments, as corny as that sounds, while watching this gameplay. But yeah, guys, that is about it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I realize that this kind of came out of nowhere. I'm sure many of you weren't expecting us to go back in time. We're normally talking about new operators or things to come to that nature, but I just thought this would be a fun trip down memory lane and just to see how far this game has progressed. The alpha was literally almost 3 years ago, and it's just cool to see what it was back then from what we have today. If you were someone who played during the alpha or the beta, I realize that may not be a lot of you because this game has grown so much. Did you expect Siege to get to the point that it was today? Were you expecting to play this game for the last couple of years? Let me know your thoughts down below. Yeah, guys, until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.